Okay. So my name is Peibo. I'm from Duke University, also a member of the Coherent Collaboration. So today I'm going to talk about a machine learning applications in the Coherent Collaboration. So here's some brief overview. I'm going to start with some introduction, research interests of the collaboration. I'm going to talk about like three applications on three individual detectors. So the first two are actually the work of Jacob. So if you're really interested in them, you can email Jacob in the link right here. The last one is mine. I'm going to end up with some conclusions. So, okay, the Coherent Collaboration actually contains 21 institutions from 4 countries, and also uses the spallation neutron source at the Oak Ridge National Lab as the neutrino source. So the major research interests involved studied the coherent elastic neutrino nuclear scattering, also called sevens, and also some inelastic neutrino interactions like charged current interactions. So here's the map of the sevens efforts around the world. And as you can see, the coherent collaborations like right here. So a little bit about the sevens. So the cross section is showing in the top formula. It was actually predicted by D. Freeman in 1974. So it has the largest of all standard model neutrino cross sections at between 1 and 100 MeV scale. But the energy nuclear recoil is actually a little bit low. So it's actually a way to probe the standard model sensitively. Also, it have many applications like for the dark matter experiments, it's like one of the major backgrounds actually. Also for supernovae, and because of the reduced mass in the actual detectors used in this process, it's actually really helpful for like reactor monitoring in this case. So now a little bit about one example of the inelastic neutrino interaction. So the electron neutrino charge current interaction on iodine 127. So the formula is actually listed right here. The star actually represents that for the final product of xenon 127, it can end up in excited states. So if that happens, you have the excitations. You can have actual protons or neutrons or gamma rays or alpha particles as a result. And the cross section here is listed below. As you can see, you have G sub A, which is the axial vector coupling constant here. So that's saying if you know what a cross section is, you can know what G sub A is. You can study its actual quenching. So by saying quenching, I mean the experimentally measured G sub A in this process is actually smaller than the theoretical value. And that's actually affecting the reaction rate of some other experiments like the double beta zero neutrino, zero neutrino double betaless decay. So in this case, if you know what a quenching is, it can actually benefit your studies on other important experiments. So in the coherent, we're using the SNS as the neutrino source. It's actually this is right here. So as you can see the process, we actually have three different neutrino flavors. So we have muon neutrino, anti-muon neutrino, and electron neutrino in this case. So we actually made a successful observation of sevens for the first time using a 14.6 kilogram cesium iodide scintillator and published this result in Science back in 2017. So after the first observation, the experimental interest shift from the observation to actually precision measurements. So as you can see here, the Coherent Collaboration has deployed multiple detectors at the SNS. So I actually circled all the detectors that actually are using machine learning. In this case, there are actually Sense10 and Noob and also sodium iodide 185. It's the little one right here. So to begin with, I'm gonna first talk about neutrino cubes. So they're actually used to detect the neutrino-induced neutron. It's actually a potential sense background. So the excited nuclei in the target material, like iron or like lead, can actually emit neutrons, which actually produce similar nuclear recoil events, like in the detectors, with similar timing to the actual neutrino itself. So in this case, if we can study this background, it just help us better understand like for the precision measurements. And sadly, this process yet to be observed. So it's actually relevant to a solar neutrino nuclear synthesis and halo. So in this case, the machine learning approach was used to actually tell the difference between gamma and neutron in this plot in the low energy range. So this is showing a time tag Californium 252 source. So in this case, it's using this source to generate data that you can train with. So because it's time tag, you can clearly separate the neutrons and the gamma in this case. So actually the black rectangular is actually the neutron. The other one, the right part is the gamma. And as I can see here, is the TMV result for the boosted decision tree is showing in this plot. So it can actually separate signals and backgrounds pretty well in this case. And here also listed the neutron acceptance for all three categories right here. So the preliminary result has shown some effectiveness at lower energies for detector cells. Also, the next one will be SENS10. In this case, the SENS10 is actually a liquid argon detector. It's located roughly about 28 meters from the SNS target. And here's the neutrino flux at a position. So we actually had a first production run from July 2017 to December 2018. And if you're really interested in the result, you can check this paper right here. So because we're using argon 39, in this case, we're gonna have some beam unrelated backgrounds right here. So as you can see, it's listed right here. Here's like a table of the statistics of the data events we're expecting, and also the beam related backgrounds and beam unrelated backgrounds. Here are some figures about actual detectors. And so to actually, so in this case, we're gonna tell like separate. So if you look at the PSD generator data here, so here's the data produced by the DT generator actually produce a 14 MeV neutrons. In this case, it's actually this little thing right here. So in this example, we have a PSD. You can apply a PSD cut in this case. So top, it would be having neutrons, and the bottom will be gammas. In this case, if we apply a PSD cut, you might be losing some signals right here. So some signals of the neutron part. To prevent this case, we're developing a 2D CNN initially. So we will actually try to separate the neutrons from the gammas without applying any PSD cut. And in this case, as you can see here, the input for the training process is actually the nuclear recoil waveform and electron recoil waveform. So actually we convert this waveform to like a recurrence plot in 2D. So we use that as the input. And here's showing like the training result. So then I actually realized, it's actually only, it's a waveform, right? It's actually just 1D data. So we can actually use 1D CNN only. We don't need to use 2Ds. So in this case, a 1D CNN was developed, and you can see the result here. And here are the background classified and signals classified. So if you actually make a comparison between like this plot right here and the DT generator data right here. So you have, as you can see, you have actually more data recognized in this plot in the low energy range for neutrons. And that's actually why this approach is showing improvement over the PSD cut. Because if you just apply PSD cut, you'll be losing all the signals below somewhere here. So also like initial results, as I said, looks promising. And here's also some plot for the first production run energy, recoil energy range, and the engineering run energy range. And lastly, I want to talk about naive 185. So it's using a sodium iodide detector, about 24 individual cells. It's about 7.7 kilogram. And you can see here, it's like a detailed like scratch plot for the detector setup. So it's actually about 20 to 21 meters away from the target. So the goal is to actually measure the enclosed cross-section of this process. And the dominant background here is the steady state muons. So we're gonna use machine learning to actually differentiate the charge current signal from the steady state muon. So they're actually, we're not really detecting any nuclear recoils here. So it makes it really challenging because like a muon signal looks really similar to like the electron signals in this case. So to train the machine learning model, I'm using simulations because we don't really know, which events charge current and which events muon in this case. So we don't really have any real data for the charge current signals. So I'm using simulations. It's actually generated by Mari, which is a charge current event generator. It was originally developed for liquid argon. And in this case, I'm using it for iodine 127. It's also based on geon4 in this case. So as you can see here, you can actually choose different geometries with geon4, and that's saying this method can be generalized to other detector setups. And also, when choosing the correct wall state or appropriate BGT values used to generate the charge current signals, you can actually, you have many sources. So as you can see here, we apply the different BGT calculations from different authors in the Mari model. And as you can see, in terms of the integral energy, you don't really see a big difference in this case. And also on left-hand side, I'm showing the simulated muon events and the BMF muon events taken by the actual detector. You do see a little difference in the energy histogram, and we're still investigating as why this happens. So I'm using a convolutional neural network, and my input in this case would just be the event energy display as shown in the right-hand side. So here's an example of a simulated charge current event, and here's an example of simulated muon. In this case, they look really similar to each other. That's actually one of the constraints of the model. So in this case, what you can see here on the y-axis and x-axis, they're just representing the actual geometry of the top view of the detector. So you see like you have 12 on the x-axis and 16 on the y-axis. That's because each detector cell is about like 2 by 4 inches. And you have like 4 by 6 detectors. That's why you have 12 by 16 in this case. So to actually reduce the complexity of the program, I'm reducing this geometry back to like 4 by 6. So actually, you're only gonna have 24 pixels in this case. Makes things easier. And the general structure of the network is shown below right here. So I have a 4 by 6 UN energy display as my input, along with labels. And going to convolution 2D layers and pulling 2D and pulling, and finally dense layer and out. So to understand the performance of this, we're using like a arbitrarily made set of data sets as the test sample. So in this case, we're assuming we have 200 charge current event simulations and 1950 muon simulations, and also 50 neutron simulations in the test data group. So the muon and neutron simulations would just be the cosmic neutron from the sky. So in this case, I add it as a third category to see, how will my program behave with an actual category in this case. And we do have this kind of background, even though it's not really dominant as the muons. So in this case, this is the confusion matrix. You have the predicted label on the x-axis and also the true label on the y-axis. As you can see here, about 77% of the charge current signals are labeled as charge current signals correctly. And we can also expect 22% of the muon to also be labeled as charge current signals incorrectly. So that's saying if I apply this machine learning filter, those 22% of muon left will be my background, will be my new background. So if, here actually shows a comparison between this machine learning approach and a more traditional physical cut approach. So the multiplicity is actually how many detector cells that have non-zero radium simultaneously. So if I have back to this slide right here, in this case, like this event energy display is showing a multiplicity of 3. So just to give you a sense of what I think is. Okay, so if we do a cut on the multiplicity, for example, we choose events that only have multiplicity higher than 3. I'm gonna have about 77%, 33% signals left and 5% background left. But if we apply the machine learning model, the CNN filter here, we can have 77% signal left and 22% background left. So I can see here, it's actually the initial result is showing some improvement over any traditional cut we have. So about the conclusions. So the Coherent Collaboration has tested using machine learning on multiple detectors. In this case, the results are preliminary, but are pretty much promising in this case. So the developed machine learning approaches can be generalized to the other detector setups. For example, we have the time scale sodium iodide detector on the left. We also have a larger version of Sense10, which is Sense750 in this case, and also have another SIPM assembly available. So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Peibo.
So
very
we don't
cool
currently...
to hear about it. Certainly.
So we don't currently have any, oh, one just came up. Do you have any concerns about training deep networks using simulations? Have you looked into possible systematics from this?
Oh yeah, that's a very good question. So I guess to answer that is, we don't really have any alternatives in this case. For example, for the charge current signals, the reason we're using this machine learning filter is we're not trying to figure out, which events charge current signals, right? So we can't really have any other alternatives besides using simulation. So yeah, I mean, there could be some constraints of using simulations because, for example, they may not really represent what a signal truly looks like. Or, maybe they have some like theoretical like calculational differences. So yeah, we're still investigating as, how similar this simulation actually is compared to real data.
All right, and that is all of the questions.
I have maybe not a question, but a comment. If you can go to your slide 14.
Okay, so 15, right?
The results of the CNN.
This one?
Yes, it's a comment that taken at face value, if I just look at the number 77% compared to the performance that achieved by similar methods and other detectors, does not immediately impresses you, right? People easily achieve in some other applications 98 and
exactly.
higher. But if you compare it to what is in your case is traditional analysis approach, right? The cut-based approach, if I understand the explanation correctly, then you basically double the performance, or even more than double, right? Is it a correct interpretation if you can compare 77 to 33% obtained with the cut?
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, there are many like people doing this kind of a similar approaches to using other detectors. They're able to achieve like at least 90% each accuracy. I mean, I think the problem in this case is that like for muon signals and electron signals, they're just so similar.
Right, they're just too similar, and still you can do better than with regular approaches and substantially better. So it's still impressive, not the absolute number, but the relative. Okay, no last minute questions. Then thanks again it was very nice to hear about the Coherent application.
Yeah, thank you.